In this video, we will compare data definition language with data manipulation language and have a look at the provisioning and deployment of relational data services on Microsoft Azure. The final part of this section, we've come across all of these objects, but how do you use them? And there are two main strands for this. There are things which create, alter, or delete these objects. And these are called data definition language. So definition. So if you're creating something, you're defining what the object is. If you're altering it, you're redefining what it is. And if you get rid of it, okay, you're undefining what it is. So that is called DDL. And we have data manipulation language. So if we add a row, you're manipulating an object, but you're not actually changing the structure of the object. If you delete a row, then again, you're altering the data but not the structure. If you update an existing row, again, you're changing the data but not the underlying object. And these are called DML. So yes, there's just one letter difference, I'm afraid, DDL and DML. So it's this definition to define. So an example of this we've got up here, create view. Create is an example of definition. I'm creating. I can create a table, I can create a view, I can create an index. Now, suppose I've got an existing table and I didn't want to create it. I wanted to change it. I wanted to add a column, for instance. Well, I do that using the word alter. Now, some variants of SQL may use in certain instances the word modify. However, for the purposes of what we're looking at for these particular languages, SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, MariaDB, I would concentrate on alter as your data definition language. And then if I want to get rid of an object, well, let's just come back to that. Now, to manipulate, if I want to add an extra row in, I insert it. I don't use the word add because I could be adding an object, so we need different words. So create creates an object, insert adds an extra row. If I want to refine what a particular row or maybe series of rows does, I would be updating it. So this is like altering, but I alter an object, I update a row. So if you think of the word row, I don't create a row, really. I insert the data within a row. I don't alter a row, I update the data that is in a row. Now, to get rid of a row, I delete data that is in a row. Or actually, I just delete the entire row. So let's go back to this DDL. I want to get rid of an object. So you might think delete, but then I'm deleting data and I'm deleting an object. And the two could be mixed up. So I use the word drop instead. So I drop a table, drop an index, drop a view. So that removes it. And we really don't want these two words to be mixed up because I might think I'm actually deleting a row, but in reality, I'm deleting a table, I'm dropping a table. That wouldn't be good. So there is a big difference between delete from name of table. So that, without any where clause, would delete every single row. If I added a where clause, then it would only delete those rows that fulfill the where clause. However, drop table, name of table, that will not just delete the data, but also delete the structure as well. And there's no recycle bin for tables unless you're doing backups. And thankfully, backup quite often happen in cloud-based services, at least for safety's sake. Now, there is actually one more DML, data manipulation language, that I do want to talk to you about. And it's one you've already seen. You want to select data that is in a row. Some people argue that select isn't part of DML, that it should be its own separate category. However, for the purposes of this course, at the very least, you should regard select as part of DML. Why might it not be part of DML? Well, it doesn't actually manipulate it. In other words, it doesn't do a permanent change. But you could argue, yes, it manipulates it because you retrieve the data from a table, but use a where clause, so you only want certain rows. Use a select clause, you only want certain columns, you order it. All of that could be considered manipulation. So you don't need to know anything more than this in this particular course. You need to know what data definition language is. It does something to objects, to tables, views, stored procedures, functions, all the other things that we've seen. Constraints, indexes. Data manipulation language takes an existing object and has a look at the data and either adds to it, changes it, removes it, or queries it. So the biggest one I think that may cause confusion, drop removes an object, delete removes a row or multiple rows from an object. So you DDL objects, you DML data in objects. And that is data definition language and data manipulation language. In this video, we're going to have a look at how you deploy relational data services. But if you have gone through this course so far, you've seen many instances of how we do it. So you go to your particular service that you want deploying, you click on Add, so you specify the type of data service, you specify storage, you specify memory, compute, and maybe other things such as the networking or tags. So these are little markers to put on your database. Now, there are 4 ways that you can provision data services. The first way is this way that we have seen time and time again. So this is through the Azure portal, portal.azure.com. Another way is through the resource managers templates. So what are these? Well, if we have a look at one of these SQL databases, for instance, that we've already got set up, and scroll right down to the bottom, we have got export template. So let's have a look and see what this is. So this is a JSON, JSON template, and it describes what this is in machine code, essentially, but in fairly easy to understand machine code. So here we are putting as a resource a database in the UK South region using the collation Latin 1 general. And then there are other things that need to be deployed with it, like advisors, auditing policies, and so forth. Now, you don't need to actually know the ins and outs of the Azure Resource Manager template. You just need to know that basically it exists. It exists in text form. So I can export it, I can download it into somewhere else. So here is one of the files that I have just exported. So because it's a text file, what I can do is deploy that as a new SQL server. So it's got repeatability. So I've got an easy way to say, okay, you know all those settings that I put in the Azure portal, I want them again, or I want them with minor modifications. So it allows for repeatability. So say you were trying to deploy 100 SQL databases. I personally wouldn't do that. I'd use a managed instance if that were the case. But if I were doing something repetitive like that, or maybe I was wanting to have storage around the world, maybe one in each region, the 60 regions, all I'll have to do is get this text file and just change the location and then say deploy. There's also a what if operation. This is still, I think, in preview at this stage, which the computer can say, okay, this is what's going to happen if you do this. For example, this SQL database will gain a new tag, it will change its IP address or internet or something like that. Now, the what if operation is done in the command line interface, the CLI. Now, if I click on scripts here, so I'm in export template. If I click on scripts, you can see that we've got PowerShell and Azure CLI command line interface to manage. And there's a start button, but that start button doesn't actually get us to PowerShell or CLI. It just gets us to a information page about it. So here's an example of one. That's not actually starting it. You actually start it up here. So this allows you to get to your Cloud Shell. Now, there are two different types of shell, Bash and PowerShell. Bash was developed in the late 80s for use with, back then, Unix operating systems, now Linux operating systems. PowerShell, that was developed 2006 or so, and is more a Windows interface. So I can click on PowerShell, I'll click on Create Storage, and here you can now see the shell being connected, and you can change it back to Bash if you so wish. CLI is an extension of this. So I could go, like, for instance, AZ login and log into Cloud Shell, for instance, if I was doing this remotely. Speaking of which, you can download Azure CLI for Windows, Mac operating system, or Linux, or you could just use it here in the Azure Cloud Shell. Now, the good news is you don't really have to know too much more about Azure CLI or Azure PowerShell, because this starts getting really complicated and you don't need the intricacies of learning either language here. This is an example of how to create an Azure SQL database. So you can see we have new-AZ resource group, SQL Server firewall rule, SQL database. So you can see it's sort of intelligible when you get the hang of it. The $ indicates a variable, something that you can add your own text to. So here we are assigning a variable called location and West US2. So that's the location of this new SQL database. This is PowerShell. CLI, here is how we would do it. AZ space SQL space DB space create. So you can see PowerShell uses hyphens, whereas CLI uses spaces. Why is there PowerShell and CLI? Well, it depends on what you want to do. If you want to manage resources, then you would use Azure CLI. If you want to manage Windows servers, for instance, you would do PowerShell. But that's as far as you need to know. You don't need to go any further down this particular rabbit hole. Just know that there are 4 ways of provisioning. That means basically creating, and deploying. So that means actually the creation itself. So not just specifying what it is, but also actually doing it. Relational database services. So you've got the Azure portal, you've got the command line interface, the CLI, you've got PowerShell, and you've got the templates. And the advantage of templates is that you can reuse them, download them, reuse them, good for redeployability elsewhere. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. This video was previously part of our DP900 Microsoft Azure Data Fundamentals course. If you would like any help studying for this exam, then please go to our website, idodata.com, and find out more about our video course on this exam. We've also got video courses on the AZ900 exam and many other exams. We've also got video courses on SQL and other topics as well. If you would like similar videos to this one, then please click on the link on the end screen. And if you like this video, please click on the like, and why not subscribe and click that bell? That way you'll be notified of any new videos. I'm Philip Burton of idodata.com. Thanks for watching and keep learning.